Everybody, you can go ahead and be seated if you're still standing. It's great to have you with us, and welcome if you're here in person or you're here by way of internet this morning. Now, speaking of here in person, it's great to be able to tell you that our friend Kent Eric is here visiting with us from Los Angeles. Give him a big hand. Now, most of you don't know him because Kent was with us back when we were still meeting at the Hotel Durant in ancient times when there were dinosaurs still on the earth. And we have come to threaten him this morning, which is to say that when he left his sunglasses at my house. And I just want to go on record that he's not seeing these again permanently until he moves back. So this is for you, buddy. It's so good to see you. Thanks for honoring us with your presence today. Kent is a video game designer working down in the wrong part of the state. But we're working on getting him back up north, so it's good to have you with us today. You know, I truly believe in my heart that if it weren't for undergraduate students, the field of psychology would not exist at all. Because without undergraduates, there wouldn't be huge pools of willing, great, hungry research subjects who could be used as human guinea pigs in the experiments upon which their professors build tenure-track careers. This has always been true since the middle of the last century, and is certainly true at our university. I was reading an article online recently about one of the studies done at our university on the subject of compassion. It actually combined 3 different research modalities. And you know how these things work. You show people a film that gives them certain feeling states, and then you do a pre-test and a post-test, and then you give them thought experiments, or you throw a quarter on the sidewalk and see who stoops to pick it up and who does. You know how all those protocols work. Well, they did all that stuff. And what they found was that there was a difference between the way religious people and not very religious people experienced compassion. Not very religious people, when they saw someone in need, tend to feel strong emotions of compassion, and that's what moves them to help, which they frequently do. Religious people tend to feel fewer emotions of compassion, but to be guided more by things like doctrine and what other people might think of them and other kinds of social forces. And I thought, that's interesting, you know, because it almost means that religious people are moved to help by their religion. I mean, think of it. It's a possibility. I know in the secular world we live in, that seems far-fetched, like backside of the moon, but it actually is possible. When I read that, I thought, you know, it's so funny that it takes such high science to explain something that is really so simple. I learned about compassion from my dad, who was a pastor in another state, and he and Mom did a lot of things to help people, but one of the things that really sticks in my mind like a dart on a dartboard is Thanksgiving Day, where he would give up a part of time with our family to take these big cardboard boxes around to low-income households filled with a complete, fully cooked Thanksgiving dinner. Because he just thought that nobody on a day like that should go without what our family had, which was a complete, fully cooked Thanksgiving dinner. And he wouldn't take me along on those days. He took me a lot of places, but not to those places, because I think he was concerned that they might be a little too difficult for me to process. As a kid. I kind of wish now that he had done that. But he would always tell us the stories later when he dropped them off, of meeting the parents and the kids. He knew the kids by name. I could actually call one of their names this morning if I had to. And he would leave them with this food. And what I loved about this was my dad wasn't a man of a lot of words. And so he didn't come home and say, "Now, son, the moral of this story is," you know, that dad, you know what dads do. This is what compassion, this is what, because the stuff that's real, you actually don't have to explain it very much, do you? You can kind of see it, and it sort of gets on you. And to me, that was my model. That was kind of the North Star on that issue that I tried to guide myself by. This month, we're talking about those kinds of things, those cardboard box things. You know, all of the great stuff about the Christian faith is transportable and scalable. In other words, it works on scales large and small, and it's available to everyone across every kind of social line. It's a cardboard box faith. Best practices means, what are the things, the people that have enduring fruitfulness, that you might want to copy? What are their behaviors, the behaviors that really make a difference? Now, if your great behavior is that you're a world-class player of a Stradivarius violin, not a best practice. Because no one can emulate that. You're the only one that can do it. That's why you're famous, and the rest of us maybe not so famous. It's the cardboard box stuff. It's the taking the turkey. It's the things that anybody can do, the simple things that really change life. That's the best practice. That's why generosity made the list. And we talked last week about that and how giving financially is really just a great spiritual discipline. You know what it is? It's a great way of putting a piece of duct tape over the mouth of materialism and making it ride in the back seat of your life in silence.
Right.
So you and God get to talk about where your life actually ought to be going. If you're looking for a way to start that discipline, tithing's a great way, giving 10% of your income to the ministry that you call home. It's not a demand or a requirement. It's a great opportunity and just a great way to keep the duct tape where it belongs in your life. Today we'll talk about compassion, not because it's being studied at Cal, go Bears, but because it's in the Bible. And there are a lot of places. One of my favorites is a passage written by John, Jesus' closest follower, closest friend when he walked the earth. One of the only people from the original 12 to actually watch him die on the cross. And later in his life, John is a very important person in the early Christian church of the first century in the Roman Empire. He's living in a city called Ephesus, and he's writing a letter to a group of Christian churches in a place that the Romans called Asia. You would call it Turkey today. And he has a close personal relationship with these folks, and so he's worried about them. And when you're worried about a friend, don't you send him a message? Well, John, inspired by God, sends this letter to all of these people because he's found that there's this new teaching that's crept into the church. And the teaching comes from the lips of people who claim to have achieved moral perfection and who offer a path to absolute enlightenment if you put yourself under the spell of their instruction. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? And John is writing not to bash them. He doesn't go after them. He exposes what they believe because they claim that Jesus hasn't come in the flesh and hasn't died for our sins. And so his advice to these early Christians is, well, you can tell who's the real deal by how they act. And here's how you should act. And so he plunges into that principle in chapter 3, verse 11. It's on the backside, as Jeff said, of the program you received, also on the screen. For this is the message that you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another, meaning in a continuous sense, love as a lifestyle. You know, if you do something loving for somebody and it's so unusual and special that they send you a greeting card to say thanks, maybe it's not so much a lifestyle for you. Maybe it's a little intermission from the way you are the rest of the time, and they're so surprised that you did something nice. They buy something for $4 at CVS and mail it to you with a Starbucks card inside. Holy cow, how bad is that? You say, no, not like that. Just you love all the time. It's a continuous thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's something that you walk in, not something that you dabble in because you don't have anything better to do that day. And then, as is his way, he draws a comparison. John almost always deals with subjects by using dichotomies, light and dark, and in this case, Cain and Jesus. He says, we should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one and murdered his brother. That's Abel. That story is told in the book of Genesis, the very first one in the Bible. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. Now, to say Cain to this ancient audience is like saying Justin Bieber to you. Everyone knows who this is. This was perhaps the most famous figure of Old Testament literature in the culture of the first century. So famous that Philo, the Jewish contemporary of the Apostle Paul, actually wrote 4 books just about Cain. I mean, that's more than the Hunger Games, isn't it? Isn't that only 3? He was phenomenally popular, and so as soon as this is read, and it's probably being read out loud to these people, everybody's attention perks up. Kind of like the way in the middle of a sermon, if you refer to a movie, everyone starts to listen to you all of a sudden. So now everybody's dialed in. Oh, it's Cain. It's Saving Private Ryan. It's whatever. Then he says, do not be surprised, brothers, that the world hates you in an ongoing way. So he's contrasting continual ongoing love with continual ongoing hate. He's saying essentially that the world could hate you the same way Cain hated Abel, and maybe for the same reasons. Isn't it interesting that the very first homicide recorded in the Bible is over religious differences? And yet the Bible's pretty plain that it wasn't the religion that was the problem, it was the people who came to the religion with their issues, and the heart of envy that turned into a heart of hate that turned into a heart of murder, one brother or the other. Verse 14 says, we know that we have passed out of death into life. We've stepped over, in other words, out of death into life, because we love the brothers. Whoever does not love abides in death. We don't love people in order to have a relationship with God. We love people because we have a relationship with God. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer. The word there in the original language means to cut the throat. If I hate you, I am a throat cutter. And you know that no murderer, no throat cutter, has eternal life abiding in him. By this we know love, that he, meaning Jesus, laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. The word there is generic. It means siblings, brothers and sisters. It includes men and women. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart, literally closes his intestines, which ancient people believed were the center of the emotions, closing down my heart. The original language means to close and lock a door. In other words, if I see my brother in need and I slam the door of my heart shut, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. This contrast of the spirit of Cain versus the spirit of Christ is the center of what John is trying to teach these churches about what it means to be a compassionate person, not just for compassion's sake, but because it's a key indicator of whether or not they have given themselves over to Jesus, God's Son, or to this teaching that says, basically, if you'll write me a big check, I'll show you the path to true enlightenment out of my own moral perfection. John's saying, if your moral perfection is so perfect, let's see some compassion from you, because if you don't have that, you're no better than a throat cutter or a door slammer. The book of Genesis talks about this spirit of Cain, and it says that what happened was that Abel, and we know from Hebrews 11, brought God an offering out of faith. In other words, out of a right heart, out of a love for God, out of a desire to honor God in worship, and presented this to God, and it was pleasing to the Lord. Cain came out of, well, this is the weird part, out of motives that are never specified. We don't really know what was in his heart. The offering was less. It was not as costly. It was not as precious. And whatever was in his heart wasn't at the same standard that was in Abel's heart. And Genesis records that God found Abel's offering acceptable and found Cain's offering unacceptable. And the evil that was in Cain saw this, and that became envy, and envy became hate, and hate became throat cutting. I was headed for Pete's Coffee, an experience I've had before, looking to get 2 pounds of coffee to use for intermission here at 360. I like to do it personally because anytime you can be at Pete's is good. And so I got the coffee ground and 2 pounds of Sumatra to number 8, and was headed out the door when I discovered that if you have this much coffee ground, you're eligible for free stuff. Awesome. So this being Berkeley, the negotiations over the free stuff were protracted. It was complicated and odd. And I eventually reached a settlement with the person behind the counter, and it turned out that I was eligible for 2 cups of coffee. Free, 1 small, and 1 large. Well, I had a bag from Staples with supplies for the church or something like that in one hand. I had my iPad bag over my other shoulder, and so I had to ask for a carrier to take 2 of these. So now I'm steaming out through the door of Pete's with coffee I can't drink because I don't have a third hand, which normally I would just pour it right in my ear, just to get it to my brain as fast as it could possibly go. I can't drink this, and the staple stuff, and you have to keep your bag with this, and watch that so somebody doesn't run off with it. And so I come outside of Pete's, and there's a guy there on the street corner selling the Street Spirit newspaper, and asking for change in return for this paper. And this is somebody I know. I see him around town all the time. I chat with him sometimes. He's very appropriate and respectful, and I actually kind of like the guy. It's good to see him. And he asked if I have any change in response for a Street Spirit, and I said I do not, which, by the way, was true. There are 3 lies that church people feel good about telling. 1 is about Christmas presents, 2 is about surprise parties, and 3 is about whether you actually have change when you're walking down Shattuck Avenue in Berkeley. Don't lie. I had none. And so I said no. I said I don't have change, but I do have this fresh coffee that they just gave me at Pete's. Would you like one of these? And his face lights right up, and he says, why, sure I would. And so I pulled this one out, and I handed it to him, and he took it, and he said thanks. And I said, well, hey, good luck to you. And I meant it. I wished him well. And I started walking down the sidewalk, and I just honestly, I thought, this man just lifted my burden. If you've ever downsized in life, you understand what a burden your stuff is. It has to be plugged in and recharged and polished and sharpened and replaced. And then you've got to go online and find out how to disconnect the alarm because it's too loud. And then it's got to be recharged again. Then if the repair person shows up, you have to undo your repair so that the warranty isn't voided by what you found on DIY.com. Stuff is a burden. Just as I was walking out with that bag and all these cups and everything, and I'm like, oh, what am I going to do with all of this? And the guy takes one away, and it's like, yes, thank you, Jesus. I have peace because the Street Spirit guy has lifted me of the burden of too many things. 2 more blocks down, there's another guy. He's not standing, he's seated. I'm not sure that he can stand. And he says to me something like, do you have any change? I said, I know what to do. I have the plan now. I am full of faith and full of power. I have the template for how this can all work out. And so I walked up to him and said, sir, I don't have any change. Still true, by the way. Let's go back to no lie, okay? It was still true, no lies. I said, I don't have any change, but I do have this lovely cup of hot, fresh Pete's coffee that literally they handed to me like 60 seconds ago. You can feel the heat radiating from it. Would you like to have this? And expecting the face lit up and the smile, and to once again, by the grace of God, be delivered from the burden of materialism, duct tape, which should be placed on the mouth while that's forced to ride in the back seat because I'm tithing and I only want to listen to God. The man says, no, I don't want any coffee, but I do have, and then this elaborate, you know how when people are pitching to you on the street, the stories are very elaborate and detailed. My cousin died in Yugoslavia, and if I can't get this bus, I'm going to miss my flight out of JFK to go to Paris for the funeral, and Paris isn't in Yugoslavia. But it doesn't really matter because I need this thing. And so he said no, and so I stopped him about 3 words into the story, and I said, I really don't have any change. This is all I have. I just walked down and carried it back, and I got to drink this whole thing. And I have to tell you, during that whole thing, the spirit of Cain, who's a door slammer and a throat cutter, and the spirit of Jesus, who is laying down his life for the lost and hurting, they are at war inside me. Because you know what the spirit of Cain wants me to do? There are dictatorships around the world where the enemies of the regime are simply killed and no one ever sees them again, and they call that being disappeared. You heard that expression? There are thousands of people that are still looking for around the world that no one's ever seen again because they've just been vanished, they've been disappeared. And there was a part of me during these encounters that wants to look at someone who's just not doing anything wrong, just asking if I want to buy a newspaper for a quarter, just like the New York Times does online. It's the same thing. And inside me, there's a part of me, there's that spirit of Cain that wants to disappear that guy. And there's another part of me that's a little more subtle, that doesn't want to disappear and wants to be more sophisticated about it. I mean, after all, I do have to speak on Sunday as if I'm some kind of moral example. So instead of just giving you the stiletto treatment, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to softly close the door on you. So I will acknowledge your existence in the abstract, but on the other side of this partition, through which, by the way, you are never going to get, and through which I am never going to travel to you, I will keep you alive, but only as Plato would, as kind of a shadow on the wall of the cave, not with any real three-dimensional substance, but just out there someplace. And then I can worry about things like, the needs of the city and the marginalized, and I can make up all these politicized terms that sound like I'm talking the world of compassion, when in truth, I'm not ready to give you a stinking quarter in return for a newspaper. Well, wait, didn't John just say, let not love be in word or talk, but in deed and truth? When I slam the door on you under the spirit of Cain, what I'm doing is saying love is just words. And so I'm going to call you indigent, or I'm going to call you panhandler, I'm going to call you homeless, I'm going to call you a social problem, or as some of my friends say, that community is troubled. I'm going to call you a trouble, but you're going to stay on the other side of the door from me. Because if the door ever opens, I might have to have some kind of actual connection with your life, and I might, I don't really think I want my stuff taken away. I want to charge batteries and sharpen blades and look online for repairs that will beat the cost of the repairman for the rest of my life, and devote everything to that, including my 80-hour work week, which is necessary to pay for all the stuff that I really don't want to get rid of. So just back off, buddy. Or you're going to get your throat cut. Or you're going to get your door slammed in your face. So I'm walking home. What could go wrong? Now I am outside of the downtown quarter, and I'm back where I live in South Berkeley, where it's always tranquil. And I pulled our old red Mazda up to the curb on Sacramento. I'm just across the street from my house. I am less than 40 feet from my front door. And I've got a whole bunch, I'm always carrying stuff. I don't know why, I have since childhood. So I've got big arms full of heavy stuff, and of course if you're a man, you have to carry more than you really should to prove that you're, man. So I'm carrying all this stuff, and as I close the door in the trunk, which has to be closed in a very gingerly way, because it's very specific about the amount of pressure it takes for the lock, which a small boy could pry open with a ballpoint pen. Close that up, and so I turn around, and just as I turn from the corner across the street, I hear, "Hey! I know you!" And I look up, and I don't recognize the person, but I recognize the voice. Because, like that show, The Voice? This is a voice that we hear 1 or 2 nights a week, right outside our house, in the middle of the night, screaming and raving and cursing, sometimes into a cell phone, but we're not sure if there's really anyone on the other end. And so this is a voice that only has, do you know what I mean by the outside version? Like your mom used to say, use your outside voice, your inside voice. This is an outside voice. Hey! I know you! And I look at this person, and I have to admit, the spirit of Cain rose up in me. because this is now putting the person and the voice together. I now realize the format of the person's life. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, in our world, you are one Facebook picture away from Armageddon. One picture of me and this person together on a street corner, my entire life is over. My career, I don't know what my wife's going to think about it, because the individual is in an occupation I would describe as ancient and represents it in a way I would describe as fairly brazen. Hey! I know you! And so the spirit of Cain took over me, and I'm calculating in my mind, not how can I help, not how can I reach out, not what about the person's health, not what about their welfare, not what about their safety, but I'm calculating in my mind, if I use the correct angle and walk at a sufficient pace, even carrying this load, can I reach my front door before this person can get to me? I head off as fast as I can, carrying the load that I've got on both of my arms, reach my front door, fumble with the keys, open it up, get inside, and in an almost biblical way, slam the door on the person. Who, unbeknownst to me, is now sitting on my front steps. Not an unfamiliar place, because our front light is always on, and at night it can be a convenient and a safer place to stop, and so you leave a light on. Janet now comes home with her load of stuff that she's hauling, but because my wife is better than me in every way you can imagine, she has a plan for this conversation, because she in her heart has sensed this is coming. And so some of this she tells me later, some of it I can hear right through the door, because it's lunchtime, I'm eating a sandwich in the living room, and I can hear the whole conversation through the solid wood door because of that outside voice thing. And so Jan walks up, and I hear them beginning to talk, and I discover that the person asked Jan her name, she doesn't tell her, asked for her phone number, doesn't tell her, and then she drops the big one. And Jan says to her, if you want to go to rehab, I'll take you right now. The car's 5 steps away. And I know from having talked to my wife and the kind of person she is, that's a sincere offer. You want to go to rehab, you want to change your life, I'll drive you there right now. I'll take you there right this second, no fooling. And I hear more conversation, back and forth, and kind of like pushback. And Jan says something to the effect of, you can change your life. You can just start now and just start working things out in your life. Can be different if you want it to be. And the person responds with words to the effect of, this is how I want to live. And Jan says to her, okay, but you can't be out here screaming in the middle of the night. Sit here on the stoop if you want to for a while, but just don't come out and wake everybody up in the middle of the night. Now, the next time they talk, the answer, do you want to go to rehab right now, could be yes. So there's no closed door there. She also didn't act like her cowardly husband. She didn't cut anybody's throat. She offered the large coffee and got turned down. But you know what? They make coffee every day. And another day, there might be a different answer. And in the meantime, there will be someone who's at a place where the small coffee is just what they need. The 8 ounces, that's solid compassion. The 12, that's just coffee. I'm going to ask our band to come and lead us in some more worship. As they do, if you'd stand with me, please, we appreciate that. Today we want to give you a specific way to do something about this.